All right, the other day I saw Flare linked in my Hot Topics channel in Discord. It said, "Is gaming better than ever?" And I thought it was kind of interesting because a lot of people talk about gaming right now, and basically every game that comes out, they always say like, "Oh, this is going to be
Yo,
a failure.
Flex.
This is going to be a
I love your
flop. Like this game's
content.
dead on
I think
arrival."
you
But yeah, it's this is interesting to me because games always people like basically want games to fail right on arrival and don't really want to give it a chance. And like, you know what's funny? I saw it with Spectre, which with Spectre I kind of understand, right? Like the game doesn't look that in depth, even though it does have a lot of depth. Then I saw people saying with Deadlock, and I was like, how the like Deadlock just has so much behind it. It's not a new studio, it's Valve. You know, people compared it to Smite. I didn't play Smite, but it's like almost like games that have been made before but better, or have a like a unique little twist on it. And it just feels good and it's fun to play. And so I figured it was mostly a lot of just like, you know, because people haven't gotten a chance to play it yet, because it's still technically like invite only and stuff like that. And yeah, I just thought this would be an interesting video to maybe watch because I mean, I kind of agree. I do think gaming's actually kind of awesome these days. Unless you're a AAA
Hey,
FPS
do you ever think
gamer,
about how crazy it is that
then it
video
might be
games
not
are
be as
only like
much.
50 years old? Well, 60 when you count the experimental stuff. I mean, film and animation and everything, or at least twice that, and there are some art forms like plays that go back hundreds of years. And yet a medium that might be younger than your dad has become the biggest, most expensive, technically impressive entertainment industry in the world. Games like GTA 6 are human achievements. With the number of man hours they're putting into that thing, you could put someone on the moon. It's going to make an amount of money so large we don't have numbers to count it. And it's just one of many, many games in
Actually, GTA 5 is one of those ones as well. People like who see the leaks of GTA 5, they say like, "Oh, that game's gonna fail." Like it looks like GTA 6. It's like it looks like GTA 5. It doesn't even look like that big of an improvement. Like, you know, people were waiting 10, 12 years for this game, bro. It doesn't even look that good. Like, I've already seen people talk about GTA 6 like that.
It's kind of crazy if you think about it. In only the course of not even one lifetime, gaming went from blocky pixels moving around a screen to lifelike full open worlds and VR simulations that tell interesting and complex stories and have incredibly deep and intricate gameplay. That is a really impressive feat, and a level of growth almost nothing else has ever matched. And I don't think gaming gets enough credit for that. This insanely quick progression is even more interesting when you realize it's essentially baked into the medium. Video games, since their inception, have been heavily tied to computing. The entire medium was basically invented by hackers trying to test the limits of what computers could do, with games like Space War and Pong being developed as tech demos and exercises. Even when games started being sold commercially and consoles and arcade cabinets became more ubiquitous, the games developed for them were always
Chad, any of you guys still have one of these?
Pushing forward. You know,
Sitting
the
in a
Goombas
closet
in
or
Mario
something?
only exist because they ran out of storage space for more enemies and just retextured a mushroom and flipped the image back and forth to make a walk cycle. The fixed camera angles in Resident Evil exist so they could pre-render the backgrounds and save
Wait, didn't they remake this Resident Evil? I haven't played it, but like, I feel like I remember the staircase.
polygons for the characters and enemies. A lot of early games were constantly coming up with clever strategies to get the most out of the limited hardware they were given. One of the most famous examples that you might know if you're at all into PC gaming is Doom. Developed by id Software and released in 1993, the game was mostly programmed by actual insane person John Carmack, who is the closest we will ever have to a real-life computer wizard, since he decided to optimize and beef up the engine of their previous Wolfenstein 3D to get Doom to run on basically anything with a chip in it, then released the source code of the game for free in 1997, leading to people to this day hacking everything from smart fridges to that shitty rabbit AI thing to get them to play the game. Contrast this with the other famous
that's so
Can It
cool.
Run
I didn't know
Blank
about
game,
that.
which is known for the exact opposite reasons. Released in 2007 as a pretty okay sci-fi action shooter, Crysis isn't that memorable for plot or game.
I hate to say it, I don't mean to derail the conversation because like this is actually some really good points and like good storytelling so far, but that couch looks so comfortable.
I mean, it's not even the most popular franchise with Cry in the title that the studio would launch, but it does have an incredible legacy, because for some reason, Crytek just decided to go fucking insane when it came to the graphics in the game, pushing them so far that Crysis was nearly impossible to run at max settings with consumer-level hardware. It was
Wait, it would break hardware? Wait, really?
literally ahead of its time because you needed a graphics card that wasn't publicly available yet to get the most out of the game.
So wait, what if you went back today? Like if I went back today and played Crysis 3 on a 4090, do you think the game would look good or not?
Meaning it could be used as a benchmark for performance years after it came out. But that's the thing, gaming has always been inextricably tied to computer culture. In obvious ways, like the associations people have with companies like Nvidia.
It was a
and
meme
in
of
less
can you run
obvious
Crysis?
ones, like how the
What year did Crysis come out? Sorry, they said it earlier. I'm stupid.
Xbox is short for Direct Xbox because it used Microsoft's DirectX technology to make it easier for PC developers to make games for the console. DirectX
2007?
ironically being the thing
Jesus.
you needed on your PC for it to not explode when you tried to run Crysis. And this computer nerd drive to improve technology is still very much around. However, there have been obvious diminishing returns over the years. The leap from the PS1 to the PS2 is bigger than the PS2 to the PS3, which is much bigger than the PS4 to the PS5. Probably because the PS5 has no games. I mean, games are still looking better and better every year, but there's 5 new titles every week that look pretty similar to the last few titles.
You know what's the funny part about being a PC gamer? For years, I was on Xbox Andy, but now we've watched the Xbox and the PlayStation argue with each other and fight for years. And they still fight with each other, but now they've both come to the PC side. Steam has taken Sony's exclusive games, they bring them to PC over time, and Xbox brought us Game Pass. We literally get the best of both worlds. Become a PC gamer.
And a lot of the big players, when it comes to innovation, take
Evolve.
years to release. Plus, older games will often get re-released and remastered, coloring our perception of what they looked like. So game to game, generation...
I need to go back and play Resident Evil. Chat, hold me to this. Next month is October. I last year failed you and didn't play Resident Evil 8 or 7 for whatever the new one was with the big lady, and I was supposed to, and I didn't. I forgot because I was busy. We have to go back and play that, and maybe even a remake. We will do that.
Generation, it's harder to notice the improvement as it's happening. We are inevitably approaching a point where hardware upgrades and console generations aren't going to mean much. The tools and tech available to game studios are already so plentiful that many games don't use them all. But even if we're not anywhere close to hitting that wall, we're slowing down as we approach it. So to a lot of people, it's really easy to say things haven't gotten better. And speaking of things that I want to look better, my skin.
Is this an ad?
I've partnered with Geology for this sponsored video, and I have no idea how to write a simple and
Okay, good ad. Good ad. Good ad.
So while I was making my last video, I finally got around to beating the new Elden Ring
He changed sides of the couch. You know what? I told you this couch looks comfy.
DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. And as someone who has played through all of the big From
Don't you dare spoil it thing.
Soulsborne, Kiro, whatever you want to call them games, something that immediately grabbed me is this idea of iterative design. Essentially how a studio can learn from a game they made, figure out how to improve some stuff, and put those improvements to work in the next game. Or how they can find something people really liked about one of their games and sort of focus more on that in the next. This is something that a lot of developers do. FromSoft isn't unique here, but I do think they're really good at it, and it's been fun to see their evolution through all of the games that I've played. One of the things that I thought was really cool was how when Elden Ring came out and people were struggling with Millennia, a boss that is very quick and fluid and susceptible to parrying, people said, hey, this is kind
Also, really quick, I don't know when this is going to come out on YouTube, but as this is being filmed, recorded, and streamed, the Elden Ring video is complete. It is 12 hours long. It was actually 13 hours. We had to cut back an hour to get it to fit. So by the time you see this, it is probably out, because I just saw RetroType that it's going to be coming out on Wednesday.
of like Sekiro. If this was a Sekiro boss, it would probably be much easier. And so one of the first upgrades you can get is...
Spoilers? It spoils an item? It's one of the first items, right? You said it was one of the first items. It's fine. We'll figure it out. We're going to play it soon anyways, so...
This is kind of like Sekiro. If this was a Sekiro boss, it would probably be much easier. And so one of the first upgrades you can get...
It's first upgrade, so it'll come quick. Okay. I will take the L. But if you don't want to take the L, mute.
In Shadow of the Erdtree, or at least the first one you can visibly see when you start the DLC, is something that lets you parry enemies like Sekiro. I thought that was neat, and something that shows FromSoft either listens to their fans or independently had a similar train of thought. Because you go and fight most of the bosses in the DLC.
That means nothing to me because I haven't played Sekiro, so that didn't do anything to me. Okay.
And in the main game with this Sekiro ability, and it's way easier, especially for someone like me who's already played Sekiro and learned that mechanic. Something else people like me criticized about the main game was that the story and NPC quest lines felt sparse. So the DLC has this very direct storyline that involves
I think if you're muted, we should be good. I think we're good.
a ton of characters who can kind of change their ending depending on your choices. People complained about the catacombs, so they all got revamped to much bigger dungeons that usually lead to other areas. There's just a lot of stuff where you can tell the devs saw the shortcomings of the main game and it influenced their design for the DLC. Now, not every addition is amazing. The complaint of over-leveling in the main game is solved with a collectible item that still left me in the exact same position as before, where I was massively under-leveled for some bosses and then collected all the items and steamrolled all the other bosses. Except the final boss, who is a nightmare of difficulty.
There seems like there's another potential spoiler coming up. I don't know how much I trust this one. Skip for sure.
Souls-like games in the first place because people like Demon Souls in 2009, and the incredible lore and story and world design their games are known for has been something they've been working on since, I don't know, Kingsfield? The point is, you do not get a game like Elden Ring first try. You can assemble a talented group of people to make something, but it's going to be really hard to replicate the success of a team that's been working together with the same director on the same types of games on the same engine for over 10 years.
That's actually a really good point. It's one of my biggest problems with Overwatch these days, actually, and it's one of the main points I've tried to drive home, but it's hard to explain to people a lot of times, is the reason why I get so frustrated with where things go is because the scope and the people, the legitimate people behind it have changed so many times now that the game doesn't have a direction. Like, the direction has changed so many times it's impossible to know where it's going. The benefit of having a team that's been around for years like this, there's always a focused vision. Whether it ends up being good or not.
All of their games are on one custom in-house engine that they've just been adding stuff to since
because what makes games is not the game and not the IP, it's the people.
2006, by the way. There have been specific mechanics and bosses and ideas in FromSoft games that have gone too far or not far enough. You've gotten things like Bed of Chaos or that snow level from DS2. But the strength of a developer who has been around for a while isn't their ability to just make something good first try. It's in how they make something better on the next. And again, FromSoft isn't unique in this. Tears of the Kingdom was as good as it was because it's the same director they've had since Skyward Sword, with the same producer since Twilight Princess, with the same team for the last several games, building off of Breath of the Wild.
Not enough companies realize that. They always think people are replaceable, and to some extent they are. But the product will never be as good as it once was.
You can only get wacky with it and include that much content and detail because they're not starting from scratch. And that specific idea for mashing a bunch of parts together to make contraptions was something they only discovered from people trying to do that in the last game. Even id Software, from back at the beginning of the video, made 4 first-person shooters before Doom. You do not get one of the greatest games ever made without a Hover Tank 1 or a Catacombs 3D. Even John Carmack credits his optimization on the Doom engine to porting Wolfenstein 3D to the f***ing Super Nintendo and trying to get that to work. So it's not a coincidence that FromSoft and Nintendo,
Wolfenstein was actually a fun game.
Of the best games of the last few years, have also kept their talent around as long as they have. That they've both been outspoken about not laying anyone off.
Oh, I'm in the way. Elden Ring director won't allow layoffs from software as long as he's in charge. A Nintendo CEO refuses to lay off staff, goes viral following industry-wide cuts.
Kinda really important, because game development, like any creative endeavor, is an iterative process, and you need to have been able to have finished something in order to improve on it. Especially if that thing you finished before wasn't the most successful. That's the best way you learn. And I think letting people learn is something the industry ironically needs to learn, because without that, you're not getting any of these great games. It is actually incredible how big indie games have gotten over the years. I still remember watching Indie Game the Movie back in 2012 and seeing how cool these solo projects were, and over 10 years later, the level of quality has just gone up exponentially. Something like Super Meat Boy or Braid used to be this award-winning achievement, and now games like Celeste and Pizza Tower and Animal Well are all over the place.
I have not heard of those games,
you can just pull up Steam's front page and find an indie game released that day that's bound to, oh, never mind, that's hentai. The main couple things that have caused this explosive growth have been the increase in resources, inspiration, and competition. To make a game by yourself back in the day before YouTube and Unity tutorials was a monumental task, because on top of creating the entire thing yourself, you also had to learn everything about all the stuff you use to make it. And aside from some textbooks explaining certain concepts and programming languages, and maybe documentation for the software you were using, you had nothing to go off of. So of
You
course,
live under a rock if you missed Animal Well? Dude, I'm very well aware that I live under a rock, man. You don't gotta tell me.
as all of those individual pieces got more attention and people willing to make tutorials and share insights, it got way easier to make a game. Compounded by the fact that a lot of these pieces, like Blender or Unity or Godot,
Oh, it was Donkey's game? Oh, I do know it exists then. I just forgot.
got more and more open to the public. You have more options, more people willing to teach you those options, and more people working to make those options better, making your job even easier. Anyone can make a game. I cannot stress that enough. You need zero prior knowledge or experience with anything, because all of it is available to you online. I went to school for 4 years to learn how to code and design these things, but if I had spent those same 4 years just grinding away at a project, I'd be so far ahead it's not even funny. Also, possibly not $60,000 in debt. So because anyone can make a game, a lot of people
I have so much I could say about that right now, but I'm
we have
not.
more games than ever. And the cool part about having more games, even in the AAA space where they're so big and technical that one person couldn't
See, this is where I thought this video was going to be going, was talking about the AAA title space, because the AAA titles, AAA and quadruple A titles space is probably what's struggling the most, but they don't understand why.
possibly dream of replicating them is that they all serve as inspiration. Every game that comes out is a game that then exists forever to give you an idea to make a new one. And a lot of the best ideas are just other ideas smashed together. Harvest Moon and pixel graphics, Stardew Valley, Dark Souls, Metroidvania,
Goat.
Hollow Knight,
The
like deck
goat.
builder and gambling, Balatro. None of these are like concepts nobody else could ever come up with. Someone just had the will to make them, and they made them really good. So on top of this idea of iteration we've discussed within one studio, you have this whole other realm of iteration on top of pre-existing games from other people. And that's what's driven a lot of the most creative ideas and projects across all of gaming, but especially in the indie space, because competition is so much more fierce. Now it's not just that you're making a new game by yourself or with a small team, now you're making a game to hopefully be better than the last one made by one person or a small team.
That's true.
And you're competing with theoretically anybody that just sits down one day and wants to make something. The
I'm kind of
bar
more
has
interested
been
in this
set.
back half
Indie Game
part.
the movie is already out there. People have become billionaires developing video games. So there is all this push and drive to get better and better, faster and faster.
Yeah, but like the people who become billionaires aren't the developers. They're the people who own the studio and the investors of the studio. And it's like, those people only care about the profits. They only care about how make money go up, you know? And it's like,
And
the problem with something like that is like, it's not a bad thing. It actually is a very good thing. But a lot of these major games that have been out for a long time that used to be beloved AAA, especially in the FPS space titles, have lost a lot of their luster, it feels like, over the years, is because they just want to keep making the numbers go up and they believe in limitless growth. And it's like, sometimes a game after 4, 5, 6, 7 years just isn't really going to grow much more, you know? And that's okay. That can happen. But they blame the developers, so then they fire those developers and get new people, and those new people aren't as good, and then the new people aren't, it's not even like they're bad, like it's just like they're inexperienced and like they don't know where the vision is, so they try to come up with their own vision. And then that vision doesn't grow it, and then you get your own current player base gets upset because it's not what the game that they originally liked and they wanted to play was. So then they get pissed off, so the number goes down a little bit more, and the investors are like, oh, these new people aren't good. And then they clean house because they got to keep the numbers going up. And then like over time, you start to get shrink and smaller. And it's like just sucks it dry,
things out
you
and
know?
evolve quicker than the big developers can.
Like things like WoW are so old and have had so like they've been around for so long, but like they weren't limitlessly growing. Like actually WoW was shrinking for years. You know what's funny? You know what WoW did though? WoW brought back one of its original people that like designed the story, the image, like the way it was going to go forward. Like I was at BlizzCon last year and people were describing them. I don't know anything about WoW, by the way. People described him as he was their game's Jeff Kaplan. WoW's had a bit of a resurgence since then. And they dropped a new expansion. Yeah, and apparently it's really good. And people are having a lot of fun. So it's like, interesting. Now that they have the people that originally had the vision for what the game should be and what people actually wanted that game to be, and those people are pushing it forward, and it's like, again, The numbers and how many people buy horses and transactions and microtransactions is not what makes your game. It's the people that make your game.
The result for players is just a ton of games all coming out all the time that are constantly improving. You get games like Hades and Sifu that look like they could be made by a studio 10 times their size. Inscription and Outer Wilds, which seem to permanently affect the people who play them. War Thunder, which
There's a problem with publicly traded corporations owning video games. They're legally required to earn the shareholders as much money as possible. And that can be done. That can be done. But people are short-sighted. And they chase short-term gains over long-term profits.
I just found on an IGN list of top 100 indie games. Above Castle Crashers? Who wrote this thing? We are getting to the point where we're actively blurring the definition of indie game because these studios are getting so big that they're getting picked up by and competing with AAA publishers. And that's an absolute nightmare to try and argue about in the comments of a YouTube video, but it's a blessing for the community.
Castle
who
Crashers
reap
mentioned,
the
yeah, it's
rewards
a
of all
throwback.
of these games that are much bigger and more expansive than ever before. So video games are getting better technologically. They're getting better game to game. And even between different developers, they're getting better as it becomes easier to make them, more people get into the industry, and competition increases. That sounds to me like things are better than they've ever been. And yet, for every positive
Are we gonna get
point
in that
I've made,
section?
you could make an equally negative one.
Yep, here we
Graphics
go.
are improving slower and slower, so companies are remastering old games instead of focusing on new ones, because it's cheaper and makes easy money. GTA 6 is taking about a decade to make, with an unhealthy long development cycle and a rumored cost of over $2 billion just to look as good as it does. Companies like FromSoft
Jesus.
and Nintendo are rarities in the current industry, with bigger competitors like Microsoft more willing to just close an entire studio even after they release an award-winning game. Meaning very few game devs have the ability to learn and iterate on prior releases because in all likelihood they might just get fired after one. That competition in the indie scene means that if you're not grinding yourself to the bone to make something that can compete with the best the industry has to offer, you might not sell enough copies to make a living. With even high-profile developers like Jonathan Blow re-releasing old games to terrible sales in an attempt to get by. It would be incredibly easy for me to flip this entire video on its head and scare you by bringing up all the problems surrounding the industry. Tell you how all these good things are actually bad. And that's common territory for videos like this to get into. I've ended many videos on my channel in a similar way. But now, I really want to ask why. Because the one part of gaming that I think certainly feels like it's getting worse lately is sentiment. How people are talking about the industry and the way we're discussing it online. That feels demonstrably more negative than it was even a few years ago. You've got constant videos and
I feel like that's not just gaming though. I feel like that's
tweets
everything.
and articles saying gaming is dead, this studio is ruined, this franchise isn't the same anymore.
I mean, I'm looking at the top here. How much of that can we attribute to Twitter becoming a cesspool?
Just a never-ending stream of people saying that things are worse than ever. And it's really frustrating to see that when they're often not. Like just recently, I saw a tweet regarding Helldivers 2. Big game, you might have heard about it. Absolutely took over the internet for a while. And this tweet was saying that the game had completely fallen off. Quote, "It is truly astounding how a company turned their Game of the Year contender into a desolate wasteland in just 6 months."
That's actually right, though.
That's just wrong. Helldivers 2 has an active daily player base of over 38,000 people.
Well, hang on. In the time since this video came out 5 days ago, that is actually dropped by 10,000. Sorry, what were they looking at? 7 days. So in that time, it's dropped by 10,000. Now, the reason why Helldivers is an exception is because Helldivers tanked itself with Sony. Sony did some absolute despicable shit, right? 25k players equals dead. No. It is dead in a sense where its players have turned against it. And I can tell you that as an Overwatch player. That means a lot when your player base turns against you. People loved this game and thought it was the next big thing and were all over it and the memes were everywhere, right? But now you don't see people talking about it anywhere unless it's negative, which means that its entire community has turned against it. Why did they turn against it? There was this whole Sony debacle. I won't get into the entire thing, but here's the Cliff Notes version. They sold the game, trying to make it as normal. They put in there that you were going to have to require a PlayStation Network login. They didn't require it though until eventually later than they did, which then locked out players in so many countries that had bought the game and they couldn't refund it. So then they walked that back and said, oh, we're not going to actually require you to do the login thing anymore. It's okay. And then what they did instead is they completely shut that game off in all those countries and stopped selling it there, but did not issue refunds. So what they did was a backhanded version of like, oh, everyone got really mad that we did this thing, but we're walking that back. We're making sure you don't need a PlayStation account anymore. But instead, they just cut everybody out, right? That's what they did. So a lot of people got really annoyed with that. But then you have your hardcore players that are like, that's okay. Like, it doesn't affect me, but like that is kind of cringy. And then your gameplay reasons, they were already starting to have problems with the way they were balancing things. And felt like you were kind of running out of content, right? And it felt like you were just kind of like making things harder to make them harder. I also know this as an Overwatch streamer because this happened with our PvE where they just make the targets just chunkier and tankier. And the way they did that in Helldivers by nerfing certain weapons. And so there were certain events that came out that were like, for example, use flamethrowers. And then right when the flamethrowers missions came out, they nerfed the flamethrowers into the ground. So you literally couldn't get kills with them. So their content literally didn't match up with what the season's things were supposed to be around, right? Now you combine that all together, whose game in identity is supposed to be almost like this militaristic hyper unionization of a game where everybody's kind of in the same boat together. We're all Helldivers. We're all fighting for democracy. And they don't like you anymore. You've now trained them to play together and to work together. And you've also now aligned them against a new common enemy. And so those players don't want to play the game. And there was an update not even that long ago. So yeah, if you're going to sit there and say, is 25K dead game? No, of course it's not a dead game. Dead game's at 0. Concord's a dead game basically already. Like that game's less than like 500. Although that game has a hate bone or two for it. Like that's a totally different conversation. But you killed a golden goose. You killed the golden goose. You still get the egg. You still got the golden egg. But your golden goose could have kept farting out more golden eggs. But you killed it for that one egg. Congrats. You still have the golden egg. You don't have the goose anymore.
That is what it's had for months. The game is still one of the most active on all of Steam, but it had a balance patch that some people didn't like, so they have to talk about the game like it's dying. In fact, that's a very common way to speak about a game.
But it was more than balance though. It was balance plus the event. Like those two things were together. Like the whole thing of the game was supposed to be around using these certain weapons, and then they nerfed all those weapons in the ground, so you couldn't play the event.
You don't like. To say it's dead because it doesn't have anyone playing it. Something people repeat so much, you'd think there was a problem.
So like the problem, I guess, becomes with using the quote word is, oh, that game is dead, right? The game is dead. Is it actually dead? No. Did they kill off what was potentially one of their next great big games? Absolutely.
With games retaining their audience. Yet, in 2019, the number of games on Steam with over
I guess the problem becomes around what verbiage is used.
10,000 active daily players.
I also do that.
In 2024, that number is over 100. So again, the sentiment of gaming feels much worse than the problems actually are, and the actual problems are much older and more common than you might think. Need I remind you, the developers featured in Indie Game the Movie have been on record to say they often worked so hard they forgot to eat, because indie game development in 2009 was so stressful and competitive. The gaming industry had so many layoffs leading into 2012 that news outlets compiled lists of companies and employees affected, same way they made a chart in 2023. And the tally was over 11,000 people. And drives to push graphics forward have been expensive, risky endeavors since Final Fantasy VII spent $21 million on just hardware for the game, which is still to this day one of the most expensive ever made. None of these problems are new. You can say that they've gotten worse recently, but you can also say that the industry has just gotten much larger. Games are more profitable, so they get bigger budgets and more time to make them. There's more people working in the industry to lay off, more indie success stories to hear tales of crunch from. Now, that doesn't mean these aren't problems, it doesn't mean they're not bad. In fact, these issues being so prevalent for so long should probably tell you we need to fix them, but none of this is evidence that gaming is dead or getting worse. And yet people keep on saying that. Because we really underestimate how powerful powerful negativity is.
I kind of disagree a
Getting
little bit on
someone
that
to
one.
feel a negative emotion is one of the most effective ways you can get them to care about something, to get them to act. In my case, I like to talk about issues in different industries and bring awareness to them and get people invested. You might not give a shit about game developers, but if I show you a game you liked and how hard people worked on it and how bad they got treated and how the studio got shut down, well, now suddenly you might care a little bit. And getting you to care can get
I'd be surprised. A lot of people don't give
you to act when another studio needs support, or when workers go on strike, or when greedy executives do something bad and people should go after them. Now, that's my reasoning to use negative emotion to persuade people, and everyone does it. It's not an inherently bad thing, but it can be used for a bad purpose. You can have reasons to use it that aren't great, especially on social media, where it gets you more attention, views, and followers the more negative you are. 15k likes on a tweet that isn't even true. People have realized that they can get more attention to their cause if they tell you that everything is and the industry is dying, and
you also can't go off of Twitter these days. Twitter is just a cesspool.
Developers hate you and you need to stop them. So that
But also, yeah, that sentiment with the whole developers thing is insane. But at the same time though, those people's criticism isn't invalid. The way they're expressing it is invalid, but the way they feel is not invalid. And the reason why they're not invalid is because, like, those people do like those games and they want to play them more, but they're not enjoying it and they don't know how to express that they're not enjoying it. And I think that there's a great example with all the layoffs and everything I'm saying is, like, some of those games just lack direction or lack a good direction. And sometimes it's not even their fault. It's sometimes they've been put in that position and nobody wins and it sucks. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it because as a consumer, you're powerless, it feels like. Yeah, obviously you can just not support it or not buy it, but you don't want to do that because you enjoy the thing, right? So it's hard. It's really, really hard to say because I don't want to write those people off and say that what they're saying isn't true.
That's the fuel for so many discussions online. It's the secret sauce behind a lot of the
this side as well.
Keep people feeling bad because it's the best way to get them on your side. And this is why sentiment feels like it's getting even worse, even if everything else is getting better. When you look at gaming from a bird's eye view over a several-year time span, it's a very positive trend. It's a line going up with dips and dives here and there, but ultimately a lot of improvement. But when you zoom in on any specific moment in time, of course you're going to find tons of issues and problems and scary trends that seem very threatening, especially when you're living through them. And the sort of paradox of it all is that these issues can be very real.
What about all the people that asked for people to be fired, like they made a bad patch like Samino? I talked to Samino about that. I told him that wasn't cool. I literally was like, nah, dude, don't do that. That's wrong. And, like, we can have disagreements on that type of stuff. We can disagree on the way things are done, but, like, that's obviously crossing lines. And I told him. I DM'd him. Go ahead. Go on. You can ask him. But I'm also not in the whole whip people up in a storm on Twitter and start a war, because, like, I don't think he's, like, his ideas, like the way he thinks something, like, for example, balancing or something, I don't even think he's wrong on some of them. It's like, dude, yeah, I actually can agree with some of your points. It's just the way people express themselves sometimes isn't good, and lots of people do that, you know?
And just because things might get better anyways doesn't mean we shouldn't try to fix it right now. It doesn't mean we shouldn't care. But we also shouldn't let the negativity consume us. We shouldn't spend every waking moment stressing out about this, thinking the whole world is falling apart, because there's only so much we can do. And too many bad emotions can just lead to us giving up entirely. Being negative about the industry can ironically be used in a very positive way. I don't think we should just stop using it entirely, even if such a thing were possible, but I do think we should be more aware of how we're using it. And we should definitely be more aware of how others are using it against us, because it can color our perception over time, make us think things are worse than they really are. So to answer the question of, is gaming better than ever, I think, yeah, personally, it is. But I don't think it's better because graphics are prettier, or games are more complex, or studios are more plentiful. I think it's better because we have the power to make it better. We've always had the power to make it better. And I've seen firsthand that when you give people that power, they'll use it. And they have used it, despite the issues and the problems and the scary trends. They've used that power and pushed forward. They've worked toward the common goal that we all have, to make this the best space it can possibly be. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
True. Good video. Very good video. How's it going? If you dislike a game that much, you're making multiple videos bashing it, you should know it's 10 times easier playing any other game. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, I think that's a shit take. I think it's just a fringy backdoor take that a lot of people take, where it's like, if you don't like it, just quit. It's like, dude, how are you gonna tell somebody that has hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, years of their life dedicated into something, just covering it, talking about it, doing whatever, to the point where they sometimes might even have more knowledge about history and about the past than people who are legitimately making it, and just telling them to run? Like, it's just crazy to me, because those people legitimately care. It's weird, and it's like, you can disagree with them, you know what I mean? Like, I'm totally in favor of disagreeing and being like, nah, I think your opinion's wrong because of these reasons. Okay, totally fine. But I think when you tell people to just like leave, and it's like, that you kind of create a bad, almost scary narrative at that point, because it's like, how far do you take that? Where it's like, if you don't like something or you don't agree with me, just leave. That's how you have something called groupthink, where everyone in the room just agrees with each other all the time, and like someone's afraid to say something is different or something is wrong.